I would probably say this happened in waves. And if we're being very technical, I don't remember this, but when I was still an infant, my parents took a very long, kind of embarrassing Fourth of July video of me lying on my back on this white carpet. And you know how at that age, babies will just reflexively
Yeah.
flex their arms. So they put an American flag in each hand, and I'm lying there blank-eyed waving the flags to the entire duration of Born in the USA.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and I am thrilled, as I always am when I have a new guest, but especially I have a writer, I have a Springsteen fan, I have a Stephen King fan, and if you think, how can you combine Stephen King and Bruce Springsteen, boy, are you going to be surprised. Amanda Lehr, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah. So for those to introduce yourself, give us your elevator pitch.
Oh, well, fortunately, it is a very short pitch at this time as I have been kind of changing careers. So, in my earlier life, I had been mostly teaching. I'm kind of coming out of academia. Now I am continuing to teach in a more quiet capacity, but I'm a writer and currently I'm focused on just trying to make people laugh.
Yeah. You McSweeney, right?
Yeah,
And
I'm a
and
frequent
yeah,
contributor.
and that's pretty neat. I did notice when I Googled you, it did show up this academic, and I was like, I wonder if this is the same person. What were you teaching?
So my background is in English lit, and in terms of my own research interests, I hung out in the 17th century. But
Okay.
in terms of what I worked with students, a lot of intro to poetry and intro to drama, and I loved it.
Oh, that does sound interesting. I always think that um, poetry is something that I've somehow missed out on. Unless you count, which most of us do, the works of Bruce Springsteen and Bob
I was
Dylan.
absolutely going to say
Yeah.
that. Yes.
Uh, but what you would consider classic poetry um, is something that I go, that's a, we had a discussion about some of us podcasts that we talked about our nerd blind spots. And for example, I've watched very few of the X Files, and people are like,
Hmm.
oh man, Jesse, you've got to see the X Files. And other people were like, I've never watched the Lord of the Rings movies. And like, oh, wow, you can't. So literary blind spot for me is I have not done as much poetry as I want. So I would probably be someone who would have loved taking your class and said, "Oh, okay," because I've loved reader. I've always been a big reader, and mostly mostly science fiction and fantasy and mysteries. But I love the novels of Pat Conroy and
Mm.
I've done fair amount of other modern uh, literature. So classic literature and poetry would have been something I would have enjoyed.
And honestly, like I'm a sci-fi fantasy fan as
Yeah.
well. And when you're trying to teach, let's say, older works or classic works, the historically farther back,
Yeah.
the harder the initial entry can be. And I think that for new students, the best analog can be say, all right, you're not familiar with this particular Shakespeare play, but you were not familiar with Middle Earth or with Narnia when you started those books either, and you figured the rules out. So you're going to treat this, even if it's historical, like sci-fi or fantasy. Let's focus on immersion. Let's try to figure out what the rules of the world are, and you just go from there.
That's a that's a really interesting thought. Like um, in high school, I adored Isaac Asimov. That's
Mm.
just truly it's still one of my favorite writers. And, in the Foundation series, he blatantly said it was based on the fall of the Roman Empire and, a lot of that work. And so I do think that's interesting. And Forbidden Planet is
Hmm.
blatantly a ripoff of, a Shakespeare play. So yeah, I could see that where that would be interesting. Yeah, good. Why'd you decide to quit teaching?
Well, I am still teaching, but in
Okay.
terms of why we left academia,
Hmm.
I'm in a at the time I married somebody else who was an academic.
Okay.
And if you want to have control over your life or where you live in any capacity, it's not a great field to be in right now. So we
Oh, I
decided that
bet.
we wanted to use our skills elsewhere.
Okay.
So sometimes I do miss the full classroom experience, but especially during the pandemic, it ended up being a bit of a mercy. And I am grateful that I still am able to have the kind of contact of switching over to say one-on-one
Mhm.
tutoring because I like to have conversations and
Yeah.
it feels good to be able to tailor what you're doing to somebody's specific interests and needs.
Yeah. Would Well, how are you doing during the pandemic? Let's catch up. You guys, as a writer, I assume you're comfortable working from home. How about your partner?
Yeah, so I mean, I had been pretty much set up from home since we moved to New York in mid 2019.
Okay.
So this was already kind of my routine, perversely.
Right.
And my partner's working from home now as well. We're very lucky to be able to have that option available to us.
That's good.
But yeah, yeah. So we've been pretty much in this
This
room
is the world.
for,
Yes.
yeah, this is
Yeah.
about it. How
Yeah.
about you?
So pretty good. I live in Texas, where
Hmm.
it's we are recently going through a minor um, crisis. The um, you know, our governor just opened up everything
I
and
heard.
told people, "Hey, you don't have to." I've gotten rid of the statewide mask mandate, yet businesses still have the right to ask you, which I think is CS. After I told you not to cuss, that you now have pushed it on these poor, small
Exactly.
independent, you know, convenience stores or restaurants, and I've gone. We last March of 2020 we shut down our office. I do roadside assistance. I manage
Mm,
a team, and so that was considered vital. So we spent most of March, all of April, and half of May working from home, and then we went back in the office. Tried to be as protocol safe as we can. There was someone at the front door, our office manager, and every morning she took our temperature, asked, have you been exposed to COVID? Have you had an unusual cough or difficulty breathing? And have you had a temperature in the last, 24 hours? And
hmm.
if you said no, 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 you could come in the building. And anytime we're not at our desk, we wear a mask. And so we've been doing that over a year. So in a lot of ways, Amanda, my life is pretty normal. I wake up, I get in the car, I drive to work. I work and then I drive home. Uh, and we've gone to a couple of restaurants, and we went a couple of weekends ago, and all of a sudden it was packed. I mean, there was not a empty table in the place.
Wow.
And my wife and I and my son were all looking at each other like, "Ooh, okay."
Mm,
Now, on the plus side, um, everyone who got up from their table wore a mask and to walk to the restroom or to leave or enter. All the wait staff kept masks on. So I just don't know. But I did go. I met a buddy for lunch, and we went into a small little restaurant. There was no one in there, so it was very
hmm.
safe. But yeah, the waitress was like, "Oh, I'm so happy I don't have to wear a mask anymore." And it's just like, oh, But I did get my first COVID shot a couple weeks ago. Thank
Congratulations.
you. And I'm scheduled on the 1st to get my next. We're recording this toward the end of March. So my wife's gotten her first shot. So, we're slowly marching where we're going to hopefully get back to normal. And the fun story, Amanda, is after I got my first shot, we're sitting there and at the evening, and Linda's like, okay, now that you got your first shot, um, what are you excited? What would you feel comfortable going to do once you get your second
Mm.
one? And she says, and I know you would go to a Bruce show whether you'd gotten a shot or not. And I said, yes. Luckily, Bruce is smarter than I am, and he's not touring. But yeah, I said I'm still kind of, even though I've gotten my shot, I'm still a little skeptical about going to a baseball game or, a
Hmm.
sports activity. But I do hope one day soon we get to go back to a little bit of live music.
Yeah, we're getting closer and closer to that
Yeah.
threshold. And it's been a while since I've seen live music in any official capacity, but about a month ago, uh, we went out for just our afternoon walk so we don't
Yeah.
chew our feet off.
Exactly.
And there was a man who was giving a, kind of front step performance. He was an opera singer and was just going through some standards, and the neighborhood had gathered. There were cars pulling over and it was this just quiet little moment of community. Got a little emotional about it.
Oh, I'm getting emotional just hearing it. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
that almost sounds like a corny scene, like in a movie, but the
I
reality is,
know,
oh,
but
that just sounded
it was really
magical.
special.
Oh, I bet. That's very cool. So I always like to go to the beginning. We're going to talk more about your writing, but where did you grow up and what kind of music did your family listen to?
Sure. So I was very technically born in the suburbs of DC, like over on the
Okay.
Maryland side. But
Okay.
as far as my memory goes, I grew up in St. Louis. My family had lived there since I was about 3.
Okay.
And in terms of my parents' musical tastes, I think I ended up inheriting quite a lot from them.
Okay.
I didn't necessarily take on everything that especially my dad would listen to routinely, but from him, I latched on to The Who, The Clash, and the Ramones. And then
Nice.
on my mom's side, I owe her for Springsteen and Tracy Chapman.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah, and I see a lot of thematic crossover between the two of them as well.
Yeah, that's cool. Um, did That's not a lot to rebel from, because I always ask about that
Right?
question. Like usually, my parents were really strong into country music and early 50 rock and roll. My mom loved Bobby Darin and Fats Domino, but they
Mhm.
both loved Johnny Cash and Glenn Campbell and all this stuff. So, in high school, I discovered Kiss and Queen and Elton John. But, it's hard to rebel against the Ramones and the
I
Clash,
know.
right?
I
Like,
was a
okay,
very boring teen in
yeah,
that
I
capacity.
can
Yeah, there was not
imagine.
a lot of places to go from there.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I guess you could have gone to, I love Tony Bennett, or or it's like, you could have, that like, hey, um, so as a second generation, it may be hard for you to spot, but can you remember when you first discovered Bruce? And what about him spoke to you when you just knew him, but then you became a fan, maybe?
Hmm. So I would probably say this happened in waves. And if we're being very technical, I don't remember this, but when I was still an infant, my parents took a very long, kind of embarrassing Fourth of July video of me lying on my back on this white carpet. And you know how at that age, babies will just reflexively
Yeah.
flex their arms. So they put an American flag in each hand, and I'm lying there blank eyed waving the flags to the entire duration of Born in the USA. So if we're going back to the beginning, I guess that is it. But in
Yes.
terms of when it started to get me consciously, I think my first memories of Bruce, it's funny because so much of his music is about cars and driving. And I think of sitting in my mom's passenger seat with the window down
Sure.
and the kind of accompanying feeling that goes with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I can imagine that. As you develop your love of literature and love of writing, did did your fandom go to a different degree, a different level?
That's a great question. And I think it did because my music tastes now could, I mean, we all probably think that we're eclectic, but I think that the only governing logic of things that I like is that they can tell a good story
Sure.
in addition to being vocally distinctive.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things about Bruce that I latched onto immediately. And I also think as a bit of a tomboy of sorts growing up, I there was something about his self-presentation that resonated with me.
Hmm.
I liked the kind of stripped down jeans and bandana and the swagger. It's not something that I could pull off, but I could admire it from a distance.
Yeah. It's interesting. Bella Poring is also from the New York area,
Mhm.
and she she did a whole series of. She's been on the podcast multiple times, but she did one of. In some circles, Springsteen is a lesbian icon.
I was just gonna bring that up.
Yeah, and that actually did a series where she ranked his most gayest songs,
Well,
and it
I'm
was
gonna be looking that up immediately after this
yeah,
conversation.
because it was such a great article, and to talk about that, yeah, and it is kind of funny. Um, and I've had a rabbi on who talks
Mm,
about Bruce's influence in the Jewish community,
mm,
and then you talk about with veterans how in a lot of ways, despite him not serving in Vietnam, he's been incredibly influential in helping the modern veterans work. And for a white lower middle class white guy, it's amazing the diversity of I think
absolutely.
he would say the only thing he regrets is I think the African American community. He would have liked to have been a stronger influence in that. And he's talked about that in his interviews and how they wished. And that's why the Super Bowl was important to him, because he was playing to everyone then.
Mm.
That's good. Um, you I always like to preface this question, Amanda, with um, the amount of times you've seen him is not a fair barometer of how big of a fan you are. I think not too many, but there are a few select, fans that kind of wear that as an honor and
Mm.
kind of like, but for just the record, have you seen him live? And if so, how many times?
I have once. So it
Okay.
was I was in Nashville for grad school and for my
Okay.
early teaching career. So in 2014, he came to the Bridgestone Arena.
I was at that show.
You're kidding.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't need to tell you it was incredible then.
It was a incredible
Yeah.
show. My only small, and this is because I'm greedy.
Uh-huh.
My very first time I saw him was in Dallas, and Don Henley was living in Dallas. I think he still does, but Don Henley from the Eagles joined him on stage for an encore, and they did "I Fought the Law."
Oh
And I was
wow.
like, "How cool is this?"
That's
So,
hard to top.
I was in Nashville thinking it's freaking Nashville. Who's going to join him at the end of the show? Like, there's got to be someone in town, right? And it was an amazing show. I'm not complaining, but I was like, just 1% of me, because I'm a greedy SOB. Damn it. Could Loretta Lynn or Brent
Hmm.
Paisley or someone have been there? Yes. We got Burning Love and Satisfaction, and just a great show.
And I didn't realize it was the first born in the USA since 2009.
Yeah.
I was just checking out set list this morning, so that was a surprise to me.
Yes.
And I also just want to give a shout out to the friend who got me in the door of that concert. So I was living with two other women in my grad program in Nashville, and both I'm incredibly close to both of them. One of them was dating a guy from Glasgow who is now her husband. He
Oh, how
lives in the
fun.
US. Yes, but her husband, in some ways, I think that there's a lot of cultural resonance between a kind of industrial city like Glasgow and Jersey. So he
Oh,
grew up being a huge Springsteen fan. And somehow I kind of came to the Proclaimers independently before we met each other. So we joked about being musical exchange students in a
oh yeah,
way.
that's cool.
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
true. Yeah.
But he, for as a gift, he sent, his future wife 2 tickets to see Springsteen. And since he couldn't be there, being on the other side of the Atlantic, said, take a friend. And that I got in the door. I was the substitute boyfriend for the night.
Yeah, well, you are kind of the exchange student, so that's kind of cool.
Right.
That's great. Um, and was there a lot of buildup on that first show? I mean, because you had been a fan for so long, and it sounds like you weren't disappointed,
Oh no, no. And I don't think that I got particularly in my head about it in
right?
advance. I was just excited to be there.
That's great. That's good. Um, what about? I'm going to change,
Hmm.
be changing subject. Um, what about literature and poetry led you to that when you were studying? Why did that speak to you?
Mm. So in terms of
Why
why
you wanted to
poetry
study that,
specifically?
or either one, why you wanted to study that, and did you always want to be a teacher?
Mm. I think that that was something that I was starting to lean towards when I was in early college. It's not
Okay.
something that I always knew and wanted from when I was very young, but I always loved the material. I mean, I read voraciously from the time I was
Hmm.
very small, but I think that when it comes to doing my own scholarship, for instance, one of the
Yeah.
things that I love about poetry is how all of the individual words are so heavily weighted. I think that I like the best song lyrics for the same reason, that there is this kind of economy. So you have to pick the perfect word to express or elicit that feeling that you're going for. So I just appreciate the precision and the kind of play.
Yeah, it is every once in a while. Um, there's earlier versions, and we're going to get to Thunder Road.
Hmm.
That's how I end every show. So, but there's early versions of Wings for Wheels, and you hear it and you go, that's just not right. You could
Mm.
see he was still tweaking on it and working on it, and you are I I'm a big fan of hearing people like Aaron Sorkin and other script writers talk about the process of writing. Even other writers, I've had authors on the show, and like sometimes you gain by taking out, right? And that they always say you have to, you sometimes have to kill your favorite jokes when you're writing a script, because even though you're in love with that joke, it's not serving the narrative. So I could
Absolutely.
see that, and especially in poetry, that what is exactly the right word to use to do this emotion I want to share.
Yeah, and I think, and this is getting over to Stephen King a little bit. One of the
Please do.
things, yeah, that I really like about his book on writing, and that sometimes I would give that to students in intro composition courses, is that he refers to kind of tools of craft as a toolbox. And it's not necessarily that there's one specific writerly way to do things, it's tactical. You have different tools at your disposal, so you should know what you can do with them, and then you make choices accordingly. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's not just there's one kind of platonic word, which is the secret thing you have to figure out, but you have to consider uh, if you're going between two words, they will accomplish slightly different things. What do you gain and what do you lose in that trade off?
Yeah, in business, I've been working in contact centers long enough that they used to be called call centers, and
Mhm.
because that's all we did was answer the phone.
I
And
didn't know it'd been changed to contact centers.
yes, and so um, this is a cliche, but the reality is, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think hearing that, I think the same thing for writing. If you aren't careful, you're going to think every problem in your narrative is a nail, and so therefore you're going to use your hammer. But you have to realize
Mhm.
you have other methods and tools. Um, have you always been a Stephen King fan?
I actually came to that relatively late.
Okay.
I consider myself to be very much a horror fan now, and
Okay.
I think that I have been one for a longer time than I acknowledged.
Okay.
But it just happened that when I was, in my teens or so, some of the most kind of like prevailing popular veins of horror that were going into theaters were things like Hostel, which is just tonally was not my thing, and I thought it represented the entire genre. It had a very
Yeah.
flattened impression of what it encompassed, and so all of the um, all of the horror inflected reading and viewing that I did on my own time, I liked those things very much. I didn't know I was a horror fan until relatively later. So I think I started reading King for the first time in late college, early grad school.
Okay. Yeah, what's interesting is, at least I hope it's interesting to the audience.
Hmm.
That's one of my crutch phrases. I was not a horror fan at all. In fact, did not watch horror films, did not like scary films. Um, and a good friend of mine who adored Stephen King
Mm.
and Halloween and all these things said, um, I've bought you a Stephen King book. I want you to read it. I'm like, Dave,
How dare you?
yeah. And he says, like, and he handed me The Dead Zone. And he says, I
Mm,
want you to read this. And I was sold. I mean, that was, how Born in the USA is some people's gateway Springsteen CD or
right.
album. Dead Zone was my Stephen King, entry point. Because I was so fascinated by that story, so in love with Johnny's narrative and the sadness of it, yet at the same
Hmm.
time, you know, that I then became a fan. And of course I love the Green Mile, and there's all kinds of things, even diversity of like Dolores Claiborne and all these
Hmm.
other, I mean, I
Hmm.
love all of his stuff and I love The Stand, but that Dead Zone in a lot of ways to me is just the perfect, story, which was very timely during this last administration. It was kind
Good
of
Lord.
scary how
Yeah.
timing was. Yeah.
And it's so funny that you say that because I think that it may have only gotten one entry in the article, but going on vibes alone,
Yeah.
I think that having read The Dead Zone was one of the first things that really made the Bruce King
Yes.
connection coalesce for me.
Hmm. So the reason I'm inviting Amanda, and I'm glad, and I'm going to figure out an excuse to have you on again because I'm loving this, is you published a quiz that basically, is this Stephen King or is this Bruce Springsteen? Talk to me how you came up with the idea and walk me through that process.
Well, I think that for one, when when we do these either or quizzes on McSweeney's, I think they're often a little disingenuous, and the joke is that all of them are both, except maybe
Yes.
one or two. So there was a content call for Bruce Springsteen's birthday, and I'm like, okay, this is something that I would very much like to try. And again, as my mother's daughter, I feel obligated to give this a good shot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. But I think that it maybe started with me remembering how many Marys, ambient Marys, there
Hmm.
are in both texts. Uh, like I said before, I have a pretty good memory. I don't have the encyclopedic memory of Springsteen lyrics that, again, uh, genetically skipped me, but I just had a very strong I'd say, intuitive sense of connection between the two of them, in part based on their kind of affinity for the Gothic, their deep sense of place and being tied to place in its history. And then also, I think that they both share a very earnest human investment in common people. And even though, in a given Springsteen song or a Stephen King novel, you're not guaranteed a happy ending,
Right.
but you get a sense that the creator generally wants these people to be content in their lives and fulfilled and safe. And when that doesn't happen, even when that happens because of a poor decision or a personal flaw, that loss is mourned.
Amanda, the moment I saw this, and I think I sent you the link to his episode, but Ron
Mm.
Martz, who is, one of amazing comic writer, and he had written an article about how Bruce Springsteen helped him be a better writer. And when he was on the podcast, he told the story that his college girlfriend was a huge Stephen King,
Mhm.
huge Bruce Springsteen fan, and he didn't care for either one. And now then he very much says they are his main influences in his writing style. So I immediately sent him the quiz. I'm going to just go through top 5, and I'm going to tell you what my thoughts were. You
Mhm.
take Mary out for a nice drive, disaster ensures. So I'm like, okay, well, that's got to be Bruce. And I go, bit by bit, this town is killing you. Well, that sounds like Bruce too. Two remorseless killers careen across a desert state, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. I said, okay, well, there's Nebraska. You need to see Janie around because she's gone now. Okay, well, Janie's been in his. And then number 5, your clothes don't fit you anymore. You feel like you're shrinking. And I go, wait a minute, that's thinner. That's
Mhm.
Streets of Philadelphia. And all of a sudden clicked, wait a minute, let me go. And I had never seen the website, so I didn't know. I truly was thinking this was a quiz, not for both. And
Oh,
then
that brings me so much joy.
yeah.
Like,
Okay, so I'm like, oh my goodness, wait a minute. And so then I started thinking, um, and I, I'm like, Wendy let me in. I'm like, oh my goodness, and then you start putting these together. Um, it is, I'm like, oh my good, how did you find this subset and the cleverness of writing the quiz in such a way to make it that is either a Stephen King song, a story, or a Bruce, song. I just think this was I was so impressed with you, and that's why I immediately like, hey Amanda, I host a podcast. Would you want to talk to me? So was this I know this had to have been difficult, but talk to me about, you know, kind of the process of, okay, how do I do this? And were you thinking of questions? Were you thinking of stories? What's
mm.
the process of doing this?
I think that maybe I had a couple things in mind, and just because, like on a lyric level,
Yeah.
I knew Streets of Philadelphia really well, and I have,
Yeah.
okay, that and Thinner came
Yeah.
together really quickly,
Yes.
or, the Animal Struck on the Highway, like, all right, Pet Cemetery, that
Yeah.
scene. So just having a couple in a row, I'm like, I wonder how far I can go with this.
Hmm.
And being somebody who was a researcher, I started with, sometimes I was able to search by thematics. It seemed like they'd overlap. Sometimes I took a particular name and just like, I feel like they both call someone Janie. Let me check.
Hmm.
And so, uh, a lot of intuition, then backed up by dedicated internet searching.
Sure.
And I feel like within a couple hours, I had the equivalent of the wall of push pins connected by string. But
Yes.
it just became a game. And
Hmm.
I was surprised as you are how many things that I was finding the longer I searched, but I just had to stop after a point because they're not going to publish, like, a 50 item list, but
Well,
I just want to see how far it went.
so um 22 on the list is you've been contemplating that old Buick for over 30 years. And you're like, that is so genius, the idea, because that is part of my hometown, is thinking about
Mhm.
that. I'm thinking about that, the common, thinking, but then also with Christine, and that it is, I would not have made that connection. Like, if you said, hey, Jesse, connect Christine in my hometown, I'm like, oh, okay. I don't know if I would have done that, connected the dots.
And I mean, I think that sometimes I did have to get a little playful meaning wise. Like, for instance, 29, you hope fast cars will allow you to leave misery behind. You are sorely mistaken.
Hmm.
I couldn't resist the play, but since Paul Sheldon in Misery had written Fast Cars as
Yeah.
his book when he tried to move on from the Misery Chastain series, and
Hmm.
Bruce is all about the open road.
Yeah.
It's not the same story, but it's close enough that it made me laugh,
Yeah.
and I felt like it belonged.
Yeah. It is amazing, and if you guys have not seen it, please go. It came out on September 21st, 2020. It is on McSweeney's. It's the easiest thing to do is go Bruce Springsteen and Stephen King and Google, and it will pop up right away. So, what else are you writing on? Or we'll talk about other things you're really proud of that you've done, and what are your future plans on writing?
Mm. So, I mean, in terms of future plans, this is something that I'm trying to figure out as
Okay.
I go to an extent. So,
Yeah.
in terms of what's appearing publicly, I do a lot of short form humor
Mhm.
because it's something that I can see an idea, I can complete it relatively quickly, and then get it out there into the world. And when I get a chance to collaborate with somebody else, writing can be a lonely job. That
Yeah.
collaboration can make it even better. In terms of what I am working on a longer scale, I am currently learning how to screenwrite,
Okay.
which, although I have been doing some form of writing or teaching writing professionally for quite some time now, I feel like I'm learning how to walk again.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah, yeah, but it's in an exciting way. It's humbling and it's exciting. And I can't give a lot of details now at this juncture,
Okay.
but I have my first long form essay coming out in a way people will be able to see it this May. So more
Good.
details will become available down the road.
Okay. Good.
But for people who are horror fans, if you want to keep an eye out for it, I hope you enjoy it.
Yes, I absolutely. And you're always welcome to come back and promote it. So, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I'd love that. Um, I did love, absolutely, around Valentine's Day, you did fictional men review their made to order girlfriends. And I thought it was very clever. The one that especially I loved was the product Belle user, the Beast, and ordered on a whim, thought she'd be good for more, but I ended up less hot than how I started, and now I have no furniture, 0 stars. I think, talk about destroying the happily ever after of a Walt Disney movie. It was absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the most personal thing I've done lately actually just came out a couple days ago.
Hmm.
My newest anxiety dream where I am blocking the Suez Canal. So I wish that wasn't so autobiographical, but I'm glad I was able to take that cold sweat feeling and put it somewhere.
Yeah, because I think in a lot of ways we're all stuck and we're all
Hmm.
feeling about what to do. Um, where else can we find your work besides McSweeney's? Where others? You're doing. You said you're doing mostly short, kind of
Hmm.
satire, and other places where we can go to find your work.
Well, I have a lot of them listed in my Twitter bio. So
Okay.
if you're just looking for great publications to read,
Hmm.
Widget, the online magazine, a lot of hilarious people writing for them, and the
Hmm.
editorial team is outstanding.
Okay.
Same for the Belladonna. which mostly focuses on writing by women and non-binary folks.
Okay.
Uh, I One website that I love dearly and wish it got more press is The Niche, billed as, I believe, a website for 12 people. And
Okay.
I've had the pleasure of publishing one piece for them, a similar push pin and string feeling
Okay.
as the Springsteen King article, but it's more in depth, looking at the different iterations of Mrs. Danvers, the stern housekeeper from Rebecca, and
Okay.
assessing whether or not she is indeed hot.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I just pulled that site up, so I will look later. What's your Twitter handle?
So it's at am_Lehr.
Okay. And there you are. Yep, absolutely. Cool. So going back, you've been to one show. Let's go back to Bruce a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. Are are there songs that you, because of a bond with your mom or because of your personal life, that mean a great deal to you, that you kind of hold in a special place in your heart?
Mm, that's a wonderful question. And I'd say that the songs that I associate with my mom more likely to come off of, Born in the USA.
Sure.
But uh, I think that in terms of songs that just kind of twinge something
Yes.
in me when I hear them, I'd say Streets of Philadelphia, Hungry Heart, and I'm on Fire. The
Okay.
Lonely Ones.
Yeah.
They're all lonely ones to an extent, but those
Yes.
three in particular.
There is that in there. Um, any thoughts on Letter to You?
Hmm?
Any thoughts on Letter to You, his latest release?
I don't have a lot of developed thoughts at this time.
Okay.
So
Still thinking. Still
I'm
still
still
working.
thinking. I'm
I
working
get
on it.
I understand. That's very different. That's good. Um, so what have I not asked you that I should have?
Hmm. So, in terms of
I just
the
want to make sure you have a chance to tell a good story. Like you and Stephen King met for coffee once, and I
I
forgot to ask,
wish.
right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you want me to tell a story on my mom's behalf, I
Yes.
called her yesterday to
Okay.
ask how she got into Springsteen to make sure I got the details right.
Okay,
So,
please.
the reason why she is such a diehard fan. So, I actually got to learn some details of this, and I'm really grateful for you for sparking that conversation.
Yay.
And I knew this all went back to college for her, but she grew up in kind of the mountains in Virginia, Roanoke. And she told me that the first time Bruce Springsteen came on their radar, it was 1975 when he was on the Time and Newsweek covers, and they were all wondering, who is this guy? They put on his music and said, ew. So she and her brothers just kind of looked at each other and said, why does his voice sound like that? It's like he's strangling a cat. They just didn't get it. But then like a little more time passed and she went to college in Bucknell. So a lot of students from Jersey, a lot of students from New York. And it was like an immersion program in Springsteen, being around the music all the time and just the level of popular reverence for what he did and what he represented. So uh, she said that she began to realize after a point, not only does she know all the words to every song, and not only does she realize that she's been seeking out deeper and deeper cuts that you weren't hearing on the radio anymore, but she described her reaction to his music as an immediate feeling or dopamine hit of, I suppose it's almost like preemptive nostalgia,
Hmm.
where not quite enough time has passed, but you know that this is going to be important to you later, and you know that this is going to be the soundtrack to this part of your life.
Oh, that's great. That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
So her roommate in college, Terry, was a native of the Jersey Shore.
Okay.
So, I mean, got an immediate in there. And so she heard all the lore from her that, for instance, if, and I took this down to make sure I got it right, if Southside Johnny and the Asbury Dukes played the Stone Pony, and if you showed up late enough, he's probably going to come on stage and jam. So it's almost like the secret menu of when he
Yes,
might make
exactly. Yes.
appearances. Yeah, yeah. So she went to go stay with Terry for a summer and work in a law office and got this, real bond with kind of working class, normal Jersey Shore neighborhoods and the boardwalks after they turn off for the season while she was living with her. But they went out almost every night, never saw Bruce once
Oh,
that entire
yes.
summer. And they would always be running into people saying, oh, it was right after you left, or oh, you came here the day before. So we just had misconnection after misconnection after misconnection. And she tells me that when she finally got to see him, this part I didn't know. She was in graduate school at the University of North Carolina, and Bruce was going to play Greensboro. So I think this is about 85 or so. And my grandparents, who are not snobs by any metric, but this was just very much not their scene. The only
Yeah.
live music I remember them going to is opera, which
Okay.
I also love.
Sure.
But they stood in this, spiraling long line at a department store to get Springsteen tickets for her to make sure she could go to the Greensboro show
Oh, how funny.
and called her about it. I mean, of course, she was absolutely thrilled. And they said, okay, we got a group of about 6 or so, find some people to go with you. And after she hung up the phone, 5 minutes passed, there was a knock at her front door. She opened the door. Her downstairs neighbor, who she didn't really know, was standing there. And he just said, you got Springsteen tickets? He'd been listening through the floor and then came up immediately to try to get a couple. And being the good natured person she is, she actually, sold him 2 and said, I'll bring 4 friends.
Oh,
But
how funny. I love that story.
yeah, no, that killed me. And I feel like I have to thank you for that. I'd never heard that before.
Oh, that's a great story. As you're telling me this story, I'm going back and I just pulled it up, right? The very beginning of Backstreets is one soft infested summer, me and Terry became friends, trying in vain to breathe the fire we were born in,
Oh
catching
my
rides to the
God.
outskirts, trying faith between our teeth, sleeping in that old abandoned beach house, getting wasted in the heat, hiding on the back streets. I was like, oh my
Wow.
goodness, yeah. That, and by the way, that is one of um, the gay icons. Is a lot of people believe that
Hmm.
Terry, you could use the gender neutral, so it could be either one. That is a wonderful story. Tell your mom I appreciate it so much, and I'm thrilled that she shared it with you and you shared it with me. So,
Oh, well, I feel like I just got to thank you so much. I'm giving her a call right after this.
oh,
And
good, good.
I feel like I've just gotten a new push pin and a new piece of string.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Before I let you go, and by the way, welcome anytime. If you
Thank
if
you.
you're laying in bed at night and you go, hey, you know, I just connected to a poem to a Springsteen lyric, and who would care? You could, hey Jesse, let me come on and let me talk to you how I've connected, you know, some kind of or some kind of 17th century literature to a Springsteen song, and we'll make an episode out of it.
It's funny that you mentioned that because when I was looking up Thunder Road for the
Yeah,
rereading it, there were a couple lines where
yeah.
I'm like, this is Andrew Marvell's to his coy mistress. So
Oh, okay.
it's already there.
All right, so good. Let's book that in advance. Let's talk about that. But yes, I do have to ask you the Mary question. Jay Armstrong is an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area. He just recently
Mm,
retired, but every year his seniors, he would take 2 days out of the school year, and they would take Thunder Road and they break it down, often comparing it to Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken.
Mm,
The lyrics, the whole themes of, to choose something means you're giving something up. And he
mm.
goes into all this, and at the end of it, he asks his class, does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road? So Amanda, that's your question. Does Mary get in the car?
I'm admiring that for a moment as a teaching exercise. So when I was thinking about this, I think one of the advantages, or we might just say kind of enriching factors with music, is for a poem, you have to make inferences based on the words on the page. But with music, there's this other layer of, the kind of chords and sounds, and whether what it seems to be being said on the surface actually matches what seems to be implied by the music. So I think that one of the things that is so fascinating about Thunder Road is that if you are going purely on a lyrical level, the turn to talking about these kind of spectral boys being abandoned by her at the very end seems so sinister as a kind of path to resolution. But uh, it sets up the drama of the question, and the way the horns come in at the end, it's hard for me to imagine that not being her getting in the car. Or at the very least, if she's not getting in the car, he seems to have had some sort of epiphany that makes that okay.
So you are the second person that has said similar to this. I had a guy join me, and he said it depends. He said when it's the full E Street Band and the song
Mm,
ends with the triumphant sax solo, and the band, they are definitely, she got in the car and they're driving
mm-hmm,
off together. He said when Bruce does it solo, and he kind of na na na,
mm,
kind of plays the hums and things, she doesn't get in the car, and that's our narrator driving away by himself.
mm-hmm. That feels right.
Yeah, I really did think that was a really insightful thought, and I agree with you. Um, and no one's brought this up before, but it is, there is Born in the USA. Bruce could have released the blues version, but he chose the triumphant anthem
Mm,
version to send that
mm,
mixed message, right? That yes, this is everything that's gone wrong about America, but posed as this triumphant that people were playing outside the hospital when President Trump was in there, right? Like, and our joke was, have they never heard the song? Like
it
what?
always seems that way.
Yeah, so like what, like, yeah, as a Springsteen fan, but it does not belong on a firework display. It so that's,
Oh, even as a baby, I looked uncomfortable.
oh, I bet I know, though I now think that every if unfortunately I would be the horrible parent that anytime someone of your date came over that had been any time at all, like, hey, you know how long Amanda's been a Springsteen fan? And would play this to
This is when
embarrass you.
I say, thank God it was on VHS. I'm sure it's
Yes,
degraded by now.
yes. I do want to see that now. That is awesome. That is great.
Maybe you
Uh,
shouldn't call my mom.
yeah, no, no, no. Amanda, this has been so much fun, and I am not kidding. Anytime you want to join me, and I'm curious to hear this story and everything. I will send you when we finish. Uh, Bex Goss was on the show, and she comes from an academic background, and she skewered Thunder Road as basically a murder mystery. And then if Mary got in the car, he was going to kill her. I mean, he just said,
Fascinating.
"Oh yeah, I will send you her notes," and she was afraid to tell me, Like, and I'm like, no, 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 this is great. I said, just because I don't agree with that, I think that's a great version. So I'll send you her notes. They're hilarious. You've already given your Twitter handle, but please share again. How can people reach you? How can they read your work? And, you know, if they want to tell you how fabulous you are.
Well, that's very nice of them. I would say best way to find me is usually on Twitter. So it's at am_Lehr. Uh, I am not important, so my DMs are always open.
Okay. Very nice. Well, I hope you remain safe, and thank you so much for taking time to talk to me. This was absolutely beautiful. I recommend you guys go take the Springsteen's Stephen King quiz. You will be immensely entertained. And hey, send Amanda and I, if you make other connections, we'd love to read them, because
Mhm.
that you guys connect the dots.
That would
Uh,
be incredible.
Yes. All right. For now, listeners, please, please stay safe. Remember to distance. Remember to wash your hands. Remember to wear a mask. And let's all be good to each other, because that's the only way we're going to get through this. For now, take care, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.